What's up, guys? Ray Reinhardt's Chaos Astrologer. For the record, today is the 24th of January, 2020, and I have been talking with some people on Facebook, and I felt compelled to kind of make a vlog about the latest information and details in my astrological analysis with the coronavirus that's now spreading substantially in China and actually now starting to leak into different countries worldwide. So I'm just going to get into it. Sorry if I seem a little erratic or anxious, or I don't feel like I am articulating myself, or I'm not all here. It is Aquarius season. That's a season that I'm notorious for being kind of manic, on top of the recent eclipse influences. I'm not immune to any of the themes that I highlighted in my Aquarius and Pisces transit talk video. And also, I'm kind of a hypochondriac a little bit, and obsessed about, like, getting sick. So this has really worked me up, and the fact that I did all this extensive, exhausting research and analyzing all of the news and updates about this and all that, I felt like, just for therapeutic reasons, I should vent about it, and it'd be constructive to share what I have learned and everything that I've concluded with the ongoing pandemic that's now spreading everywhere. So the coronavirus is a virus that affects mammals, birds, and humans. It starts in mammals or birds, like the SARS virus that happened 2 decades ago in China, was associated with, like, the bird flu, and that's where it originated from. This one is originating from mammals, as far as they know. It could possibly be, there's some reports about them talking about snakes and stuff too, but the one common theme is that it's coming from that market in that city in China. I don't know how to say it. I'm not even going to pretend like I know. The Wahun, W-A-H-U-N market. Anyway, so in humans it causes respiratory infections, often leading to respiratory failure if untreated. Other symptoms are difficulty breathing, fever, pneumonia, and diarrhea, common cold and influenza symptoms. It's similar to the MERS and SARS, and these pathogens can lead to respiratory failure, organ failure, and obviously death. Ongoing transits emphasize on potential pandemics and disease spreading worldwide. I've made numerous predictions about the upcoming global pandemic on my YouTube and blogs. For example, in 2015, I uploaded a very crappy quality, of course, video about Neptune and Pisces and the historical themes with Neptune and Pisces, where I highlighted the common trends with pandemics and plagues and massive deaths by disease being a trend. Then in 2018, if you Google Ray Reinhardt surviving the flu, I have a couple of blog posts as well as video discussions on the severe flu pandemic that's synchronistic with the 1918 Spanish flu that I said was going to begin in 2018, and the peak of it, or the worst case of it, will go into 2021. We're in the beginning of 2020 right now, and this is very similar to the flu, and this is obviously what I was channeling, more or less, because, just a disclaimer if anybody's not aware, I know some people follow me for my astrological analysis, but I am a clairvoyant. That's obviously some abilities that I'm still developing, but I do channel messages from spirits, as well as I don't know where from, because I'm claircognizant, so I just randomly know things, and coupling that with my astrological analysis, I'm able to pinpoint exact events that will transpire in the future. And one of the things that I was told about, not just that thought came to me, but I was directly told from spirits through my parapsychology sessions and investigations about this flu pandemic happening. And they actually did reference something, I remember this, they were talking about rotting flesh, screaming, market, disease, particle, flu, that sort of thing. That was like a cluster of words I got from them, and I never understood exactly what it meant. And now that I'm starting to read more about the way that this pandemic has began, that it originated from that supermarket in China with food, likely contaminated meats of some kind. That would make sense what that's about. They have referenced, contaminated meats and poisoning and that sort of thing. And I have kind of off and on been obsessed with looking at, recalled or contaminated foods for a long time. And I now understand what they were getting at. So when we, besides the spiritual aspect of that, when we look at the astrological components of this, ongoing transits emphasize a potential pandemic or disease spreading worldwide. Wait a minute. I already read that part. Sorry, see? I'm getting spastic. See, that's why I made a list. Anyway, let's just skip to my book real quick. So I have this book called Pandemics, 50 of the World's Worst Plagues and Infectious Diseases. And I was looking to see if SARS was in here because I saw that this is going to be very similar to SARS, or it's showing similar characteristics to SARS. So I looked it up. SARS, a severe acute respiratory syndrome. The agent is a virus, SARS-associated coronavirus. It's the SARS-CoV family. First recorded in November 2002. Region mainly China. Infectivity is low. Severity of illness is high. Likelihood of dying of illness is like less than 10%. And bioweapon threat, it doesn't have anything right there. That kind of makes me laugh about some of the things that I'm hearing about through 4chan and all that. It doesn't happen very often, but every now and again a new disease appears as if from nowhere. The problems are immense, and if it turns out to spread easily from person to person, paradoxically, it is easier to track down a disease if it makes people seriously ill within days or hours of becoming infected. At least that way investigators can follow its spread and isolate people who appear to be carrying the agent. In the case of SARS, authorities had to scramble fast to break the chain of infection while at the same time trying to make sense of the nature of the newly emerged disease. The origins. On November 16, 2002, a man in his 40s went to the hospital in Foshan, China. It seemed as if he had pneumonia. He recovered and went home. An utterly unremarkable event, except that other people in the area started getting ill. The Chinese authorities were either unaware that they had a novel disease on their hands, or they were keen to cover it up in hopes that it would go away as quickly and as quietly as it arrived. The net result was that in doing nothing to combat the disease, they let it spread. That's exactly what China's doing right now. They're downplaying how bad it's spreading and how serious it is, because thank goodness to social media and people recording things and sharing it online. There are plenty of videos and photos of people collapsing everywhere throughout China. They would not be shutting down and quarantining massive communities in China that have millions of people in them and not allowing, trucks with food or anything to go through if it wasn't serious. Yet they're trying to downplay the amount of deaths and infected right now, which is stopping the WHO, which is the acronym for the Global Disease Control or whatever board that designates that this is a global threat or not. Which I find fascinating, because this book is referencing that. That spread came to the world's attention when, on February 21st, 2003, a 64-year-old professor of neurophilology at the, I don't even know how to say that, ZhongSham University, checked into room 911 at the Metropole Hotel in Hong Kong. He spent his previous weeks treating people with a mysterious illness and had traveled to Hong Kong for a family wedding. Almost as soon as he arrived, he realized he had symptoms of the disease and took himself to the local hospital. He died 11 days later. The doctor had suffered his patient's fate. Not only that, but he had also left a trail of viruses behind him. Hotel visitors who had shared the elevator with him took to the bug, which then took to Bangkok, Toronto, and Singapore. By April 1st, 2003, Hong Kong had 685 reported cases and 16 deaths, and the epidemic was escalated. The global scientific effort played catch-up, and in April discovered that the infection was being caused by a form of the coronavirus, an irregularity shaped and poorly understood vital particle. And there's that particle word that, even if you follow, I have an Instagram where I post a lot of the EVP messages I get from spirits and stuff, and they talked about flu and particle killing people in 2017, and I have that clip. And yeah, wow, reading that just, whew, okay. There was a palpable sense of fear, and infrared scanners in airports and rail stations tried to detect anyone with a fever and stop them from traveling. The World Health Organization issued a global alert on March 12, 2003, followed by a health alert by the United States Center of Disease Control and Prevention. Residents of entire tower blocks and districts were placed in quarantine, and international conferences were canceled. However, with the knowledge of the foe, authorities could start to contain it. By the time that the infections came to an end in July, the illness had been spread by international travelers to more than 24 countries in Asia, North America, South America, and Europe. The total number of people affected around the world had risen to 8,098 ill and 774 dead, of which 8 cases showed up in the USA, and then SARS seemed to disappear. Symptoms and effects. Symptoms usually appear 2 to 10 days following exposure. On the face of it, people with SARS just have a nasty form of flu. Symptoms include fever, lethargy, cough, sore throat, muscular aches and pains, with the added inconvenience of some also developing diarrhea. The only symptom common to all patients was a temperature above 38 degrees Celsius, which would be 100.4 degrees Fahrenheit. However, it was only after their death that the true destructive nature of the beast came clear. All sufferers had massive reduced numbers of white cells that normally fight infections, as well as depleted reserves of platelets, which help the blood to clot when tissues are damaged. Add these two together, and the victim is left in a highly vulnerable state. Post-mortem surveys found that victims' lungs had started to collapse and leak fluid in the air spaces. They found large areas of dead tissue inside the lymph glands and the spleen, as well as blood cells leaking into tissues of the heart, kidneys, lungs, liver, adrenal glands, and some areas of the brain. While many viruses target only a few organs, this one operates with biological shock and awe. This is emphasizing the organ failure thing. And because this coronavirus is essentially under the same classification as SARS, that would translate to... Gizzy, can you get off my computer? That would translate to a lot of these symptoms. I would say, confidently apply these to what's going on now. Region of operation. Like many viral diseases, the SARS virus appears to have existed in wild mammals, such as a masked palm civet and a Chinese ferret badgers, animals that are sold for food in some exotic meat markets in Eastern countries. Getting angry. These animals provide a safe haven for the virus without themselves becoming ill, and SARS only appeared after a small change in its genes occurred that allowed it to venture into humans and spread from person to person. Once out and about, the SARS virus can potentially operate anywhere in the world. However, it needs to be in a fairly densely populated area in order to spread well. If you are infected, cough into your hand, and the fine spray of saliva that mists in your palm will be loaded with the viruses. Touch a surface like a door handle, and the viruses will be transferred. Other people grabbing the handle will pick them up, and if they inadvertently rub their eyes, pick their nose, or put their fingers in their mouth, the virus can come on board. The features that limit this means of transmission are temperature, humidity, and sunlight. In dark, damp, warm conditions, the virus can survive for hours. On a hot, dry surface in full sunlight, it lasts for only a few minutes. Development of treatment. The bad news is that with all the viruses, the only effective treatment is to support the person in the hope that they will recover. SARS was typically treated with fever-reducing drugs, extra oxygen, and ventilatory support when needed. The good news is that it's not an issue. That it is Good news is that this is not an issue because at the moment of the virus had stopped attacking us, the last known cause was reported in China on May 2nd, 2004. The epidemic strain that caused so many deaths worldwide in 2003 has not been seen outside of the laboratory since then. The WHO declared the disease eradicated in May 2005, making it only the second disease in history of mankind to receive this label, other than that being smallpox. Potential threat to civilization. There is a very little chance of SARS being used as a terror weapon because it is so difficult to track down, no one knows where it came from, so it would be virtually impossible for any terrorization to culture it for some native source, and even if you did get a hold of a sample, it is technically very difficult to culture. That being said, the last people who were infected with this were scientists who were working on it in the laboratory at the National University of Singapore. While stocks of it exist, there is always the possibility of an accidental release. Fascinating. There's something that's circulating on 4chan right now talking about that Chinese government intentionally released a strain of this virus, and that's why coincidentally this happened right before the Chinese New Year, when there are millions of people traveling in and out of China or around China. Interesting. Or presumably, it could always just reappear from the wild. Again, physical symptoms: fever, extreme high temperature, cough or sore throat, general lethargy, collapsed lungs and breathing difficulties, and reduced white blood cell count. I'm so glad I randomly saw this book at some thrift store somewhere and picked it up. So I had a paper that was on that SARS page that I thought I would go over. Historical records of influenza outbreaks. Hippocrates wrote about a major epidemic in 1412 BC. Extreme outbreaks occur about every 20 to 30 years. Noted pandemics. In 1918, 40 million deaths worldwide. That was the Spanish flu. In 1957, 2 million deaths worldwide. In 1968, 700,000 deaths. And then the H1N1 or the H5N1, the bird influenza that started in China, 2003, lasted 2 years in Asia. The H1N1 swine flu, 2009 in U.S. and Mexico. The plague records, Black Death. The Black Death doesn't really have to do with much of that. And I'll read just for the sake of it. Okay, plague records. 1300's first record, 1347 to 1352. 75 million in the European population deteriorated to 50 million, caused by the Black Death while attacking Middle East and Asia. A total of 75 million deaths, reoccurring in Europe with every generation until the 1700s. In 1665 to 1666, the London Great Plague. Plague originated from fleas with rats, and the bacteria associated with the fleas and rats. Early 1300s China outbreak. 1347 expanded the Black Sea and killed an army. 1771 in Moscow. Influenza, plagues, etc. years outbreaks. 1918 global. 1957 U.S. 1968 U.S. 2003 U.S. 2009 Mexico. 1771 Russia. 1347 Asia, 1330s China. Initially, Neptune in Pisces began in 2011 and will last until 2025. Represents self-undoing collectively as the century anniversary of the influenza pandemic began this year in 2018. Jupiter was in Scorpio, indicating widespread disease or infection through our society. As the past month, the final nails in the coffin have started, and the next pandemic will happen when Uranus is in Taurus. What do you know? Not only is Uranus currently in Taurus, not only is Neptune currently in Pisces, but then the other aspects that I was referencing with Hygeia, which I actually don't think I'll go into that in a second, will kind of elaborate on all the other astrological associations with this. So 2018, 2025, 2027, Greater Good, Global Nutrition Society, Infected. This is just random words I have just written on here. society, infected self-inducing trauma, phantom toxic disease through food. Yeah. Found that fascinating that paper was bookmarked with the SARS section in that pandemic book. So then I was going to finish on the aspects to highlight that are ongoing right now. So Neptune's obviously in Pisces, we already know that. Uranus is in Taurus, we already know that. Then we are aware, or most people are, about the Jupiter, Pluto, and Saturn conjunction, or stellium, in Capricorn. It's also sextiling Neptune throughout this time, which, with Pluto representing disease, and then Neptune being notorious for pandemics as well, the spread of pandemics, and then sextiling would emphasize some sort of trend with this. And Jupiter just recently went into Capricorn, as you all know, towards in December actually, which is when this virus surfaced and started spreading. So Jupiter is the masculine or the modern rulership to Neptune was spreading. So Neptune would be more of it spreads because it's not being contained thing, but Jupiter is proactively spreading stuff. So when Jupiter joined the conjunction, or the sign stellium for Pluto and Saturn being in Capricorn, that triggered the pandemic to flow, to spread. Hygeia is an asteroid that's associated with health and cleanliness and disease, and primarily Hygeia has to do with, it can either have to do with the origin of disease, if it's afflicted, poorly aspected, or retrograde, or it can have to do with the way that you cure yourself and clean yourself up so you can prevent disease. So during this time frame right now, Hygeia is at 27 degrees of Taurus retrograde. So Taurus, with it being in Taurus, it's aspecting multiple other planets. Since mid-December, it actually aspected Neptune, Mars, Ceres, Saturn, and Pluto. So Hygeia was in the sign of Gemini when the virus first began infecting people. That was in mid-December when the first case originated. Hygeia having to do with disease, and then we look at the dignity of Hygeia. What does Gemini rule in medical astrology? The lungs and the respiratory system, right? So with Hygeia being in Gemini, and then it having aspects to these other planets as well, Saturn and Pluto, and even Neptune, that would translate to the lack of cleanliness, or there being some sort of contamination, being the source or root cause of this virus now spreading. Even better, with it aspecting Ceres representing food and agriculture on some of its mundane kind of symbology. And with Ceres currently being in the sign of Capricorn, and it aspecting to Hygeia, would translate that the virus originated from food sources, aka the market in in China. I don't know why I keep saying Japan. The market in China. And as my book said, this book here, that the SARS outbreak happened because of food sources. They're continually doing it, and that's exactly where it started at this time. There is some conspiracies going on that the Chinese government is released this pathogen to basically kill off some of the people who were protesting in Hong Kong. Also, there's speculations about the reason why they're downplaying the severity of this is primarily because they don't want the WHO, the global disease control or whatever, to label this a global threat and then close down transportation or commuting from mainland China to other places. Some people are, and then I saw something on Facebook as well where somebody referenced someone who has relatives that living in China, told them what's happening on the Chinese news networks. This is obviously unconfirmed, it's all conspiracy kind of level stuff, but apparently there is narratives going on in the Chinese news that the United States is committing biological warfare and are the ones guilty of why this virus is now spreading. That right there is the only reason why I even humor some of these conspiracies without having any kind of substantial proof. Because psychologically speaking, why would the first conclusion the Chinese authorities would come to is that another country did this and released something to basically cause casualties with biological warfare, unless they had that idea, from the get-go from somewhere. They either have to have substantial proof, which they can't even confirm how many deaths are, how many people are infected, or give any kind of accurate records or data of what's ongoing right now. It's way too early for them to even say or speculate where it came from. So, for them to come to that kind of conclusion, they're obviously deflecting responsibility. They're also revealing that they have hostilities towards the United States. I mean, that's no surprise to anybody. And as I was telling other people on Facebook, they obviously can't use any kind of militarization tactics against the United States in retaliation for things ongoing and the tensions arising with China and the United States. So the next best thing would be to infect the United States and kill off some people. And that with the Chinese government and the news networks, if that's true, accusing the United States of committing biological warfare and actually being responsible for this, when it's very, very similar, if not identical to SARS, that it originated in a market where they have meats that are questionable. And I don't know if they're doing it just to deflect blame, or to make maybe all the Chinese citizens that are, in favor of the United States look poorly on the United States, while simultaneously deflecting blame for what's going on. Or if, as that book actually said, there is a existing strain or sample of the SARS virus in laboratories, and it said the only way it would possibly get out again is if there was an accidental exposure. So in theory, they could have let it out, which with Neptune actually, or not, Black Moon Lilith being in the sign of Pisces right now, as I recently did a Black Moon Lilith through the signs video, Black Moon Lilith being in the sign of Pisces is a major projection and deflection of wrongdoing. So anything that would be, oh my god, it was not my fault, it's their fault, would be ongoing right now. So with those aspects at play, with the animosity going on between China and the United States, with what this book even references, with the similarities with it being associated with SARS, my end conclusions are, this is China's fault, and it's either their fault because they continue to neglect, because that's an evident thing, they continue to neglect, have any kind of, federal standards or clean standards. I mean, look at what they do with trash. Look at their air quality. Look at so many different products from China coming over the United States as imports that have asbestos and lead in them. They don't understand the concepts of toxic, toxic supplies or things that they're using with manufacturing and all that. So it could primarily be because they don't give a shit to make sure that their food sources are clean, make sure that they're prepped, safely, and they don't care if they're using contaminated animals for food, and or they intentionally let it out. The only reason why I would lean to intentionally letting it out is because this just coincidentally happened right before the Chinese New Year. So, and then thinking back to the protests that have been going on in Hong Kong, there are some, Chinese citizens that are claiming, and there's even been footage of them being rounded up for protesting and speaking out, and being taken to a train station to a re-education or like some sort of camp, which these work camps have been confirmed that they exist. That's where they send people who fall within their social standards, and that's where they've also been putting like Muslims that live in China and all sorts of other things. There's also other conspiracies that the Chinese government created these viruses, the MERS virus, primarily to kill off Muslims. That was a coronavirus that started to, go crazy in Saudi Arabia and the Middle East. So, I don't know. That being said, regardless of why it's happening, how it started, or whatever else, this is going to spread worldwide, and this is going to kill substantial amounts of people. The 1918 Spanish flu killed about 50 million people. I suspect there will be at least, well, I mean, I was anticipating there to be at least that many casualties. Granted, there is the benefits of modern medicine, but if everybody's infected at the hospital, and I just don't know. I guess I'm not going to actually confidently give an estimate on how many deaths, but this is not going to just stay in China, and if, worst case scenario, China is actually conspiring to try to infect other countries internationally with this condition or this virus going on, I would suspect that they're going to continue to downplay the severity and the spread of this, and and there will be random infections popping up all over the world. Currently in the United States, we had the first confirmed case in Seattle, Washington. We had another suspected case in LAX in Los Angeles, California. We've had another case in Texas, I think Austin. We have two pending cases in Minnesota. We have one confirmed case in Chicago, Illinois. We have another pending case in New Jersey. And I'm sure that there will be plenty of more surfacing in the immediate future. I was recently looking up mask protections because that's what's kind of recommended, and that's the only thing I can think of to use, at least for defensive purposes, if you have to go out and travel somewhere where you're near any, like, if you're within 50-mile radius of an international airport or a very congested, populated area, or if you're taking public transportation, etc., you need to minimize your exposure. So, disinfecting surfaces, and also, as that book mentioned, sunlight and heat also kill it. And protecting yourself from any particles or exposure, because the transmission of the actual condition is from coughing and sneezing and particles from the mouth. So if you wear a mask, that will help to deter you from being exposed to anybody coughing or sneezing around you in your general area. I did look up to see if there's a difference between surgical masks, or like just the cotton masks, or the N95 or the N99 masks, and I concluded, after looking at different articles and medical journal research, that there is no verifiable difference between the cotton masks, the surgical masks, or the N95 respirator masks. They say that the surgical masks or the cotton masks are just easier to use, and they're more adjustable, and they're more widely available. The N95 or N99 masks can be used as well, but sometimes those are difficult for people to use, or you have to change out the filter, and etc., so there's that. Other than that, again, things that I've referenced when you look at my blog entry and my video about surviving the flu pandemic is there is no cure, and the only thing you can do is, because this is technically a flu virus, regardless of the severity or the potential fatality involved, it's technically a flu virus. So the best way to combat you contracting the flu is to boost your immune system and keep yourself healthy. Clean yourself up, keep things clean, limit your exposure to public areas, and don't go near people who are sick, and if anything, just clean everything, just clean. Wear a mask, wear gloves if you're in public, if it's that serious. And if you actually start to come down with any minor symptoms, just go to a walk-in clinic and get checked out. Just especially if you're in a major metropolitan area, you're within 50 miles radius of an international airport, and or there's been confirmed cases or speculated cases in your general area or city or whatever, that sort of thing. So, because the issue is that The same thing that I've told people about when they develop pneumonia as a result of having the influenza or the flu, is that the pneumonia is usually a severe side effect or a severe prolonged um, condition that results in the person still being infected with a virus and having a weak immune system. So if you start taking Dayquil, NyQuil, and all this stuff to reduce your fever or to, make your sore throat or your cough go away, and all you're doing is reducing the cough from happening, you're not coughing up the viral, you're not coughing up the bacteria, you're not expelling it, and then you're just masking the symptoms that is your body telling you, hey, there's something wrong, you're sick. And then worse, most people will go on and they'll go work. They'll do their usual thing. They got shit to do. It's those people now that are collapsing in China. They're collapsing because they don't have, access to hospital care, because all their hospitals are completely flooded and they don't have enough room for anybody. And or they are just walking around thinking it's a cough or a cold or whatever else because it's flu season, and they're just collapsing and falling. And yeah. So anyway, that being said, I'm gonna go. If y'all want to talk about this more, or if anybody is interested in some of the 4chan like print screen caps or any of this other stuff that I was talking about conspiracy wise with what's going on, and you want to see it for yourself, you can contact me. Just go find me on Facebook. Just look me up, and I'll show you.